My name is Kara Anton, and I'm from Berlin, Germany. But I've grown up in a variety of different places, including Indonesia, New Zealand, New York, Germany, and then Amsterdam. But my mom is from Ethiopia, and my dad is German. My mom she's the one that cooks, and it was definitely Ethiopian cuisine that was more dominant than the German cuisine. And my mom loves cooking Ethiopian food, and it's so time consuming, so it was always a special moment, and I never took it for granted. I live surrounded by 4 different Ethiopian restaurants, and so when I miss my mom, I will order takeout and then just like put it on a plate and video call her, and then it feels like I'm eating it with her or that I'm with her. I think Ethiopian food is pretty healthy. A lot of lentils and vegetables and salads, and the bread in which you eat the Ethiopian sauces on is called injera, and it's made from a grain called teff, and that's actually very healthy. And so I think the food that I grew up eating was relatively healthy. Of course, we'd have like burgers and whatever here and there, but I think for the most part, the food that my mom was cooking was pretty healthy. I think it was more so like if we feel like eating, we're gonna eat. And I also think in African countries, or I think it's kind of a luxury to think about the implications of healthy food. Ethiopia, for example, if it's rich in texture and color, then I think that's when I think it's the most healthy. I think they measure healthy in a different kind of way, because I think the European health standard goes by calories, but I think in African food it's just about how warm it's going to make your heart feel. I think German food is completely different. German food consists of sausage, bread, cheese. It's very meaty, but I don't think it has that much of like a spice element to it, which of course the Ethiopian food makes up for. I think in Germany there's a lot more of an emphasis on a healthy body, and German grandmothers and their whole thing. The food isn't healthy, but finding the healthy variations of the food, meaning like healthy cheese or non-fat cheese or that kind of realm. I think in Ethiopia, because with the whole cliche of Africa and like the scarcity of food and all of that, I think it's honestly seen as more healthy to have a little more on you, because that is a symbol of you eating well and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think actually in Ethiopia, a healthy body would probably be considered someone that has a little more on. I feel like I was appreciated in both realms, and I feel like I never got that many comments on my body. I mean, sometimes from my mom's side, it's like, oh, you have to eat more, you're so skinny. And then as like a 14-year-old, that's the thing you want to hear, which is also weird that that's like taken as a compliment when for them it's not. Because I think the Western countries the one thing they're good at is just like sneaking up on you and imposing all of their beauty standards and all of their ideals on you. And so I definitely think the Western is like at the very forefront of how I see myself. And because I also don't spend that much time in Ethiopia as a whole, that definitely also plays into the fact that it's not at like the front of my mind most of the time when it comes to their beauty standards or their health standards. It's more so the Western countries that I conform to. I think the older I got, the more I conform to the Western ideals, subconsciously or consciously. Especially in the most recent months, I feel like I've had like a surge of just thinking about my body and then just like not eating as much as I should, or having food be like looking at food larger than what it is, which is something that's supposed to taste good and make me full, but seeing it more as like an enemy, which is absurd because it should make me happy in this very moment and not affect anything else beyond that. I think just having lived in so many different places, and now even my parents living so far away now, I just feel like I'm always going to have a new perspective on food. And I think it's just as you grow older, you appreciate food for more than the simple ingredients that it consists of. Also, I've made it a point to myself to not complicate my relationship with food, because at the very end of the day, it's just food. And I think within our society, we have a lot of time to think, especially in the Western world, about these issues. Because when I go to Ethiopia, no one's sitting at the table being like, I'm not going to have that. And I also think in Ethiopian food, they share the food on a big platter. Ethiopian food in Ethiopia is very communal, and it's basically a ceremony when you come together and you eat food, you sit at the same table. And so the associations that you have with food in Ethiopia are so much bigger than the self-doubt that food is going to bring to you, rather than the actual amazing, intricate conversations you're going to have talking over food. And I feel like it's just such a beautiful thing that if I kind of sit here and overcomplicate my relationship with food, I would overshadow the very beautiful thing that it is meant to bring, which is just a sense of comfort and familiarity with everyone on the table.
I'm Ria. I'm from India. My parents are from the south, from Tamil Nadu. So I'm Tamil, that's my ethnicity, but I've grown up in Delhi, in the north. I feel like I've always been in some sort of a cultural divide. I think I had a mix of both Tamil and North Indian food. Like my mom used to stick to, just because it's easier and less elaborate, North Indian food during the weekdays. And then during the weekends, we'd cook South Indian. Like weekends would be special South Indian. So we'd have like 3-course meals and just a lot of food. No pasta. Like pasta in my house was always seen as this unhealthy thing. And only when I came here, I realized that, oh, we eat rice, we eat rotis, it's the same wheat, you know, like there's no difference. I don't think what my mom does is cultural. I do think that she's really influenced by what she reads. And I think most of the magazine articles or like the stuff she's read is like heavily Western influence. Like now I would say, because my parents like are in a more Western India, like they've hooked on to these Western ideals of what is healthy and what is unhealthy, and like Indian food here is considered unhealthy, and I think that narrative is pushed on. So like for my mom's like super scared of putting too much butter into something or putting too much sugar into something, and not because it's going to be too fatty or if it's going to be too sweet, it's because it's not good for you. And in turn, I guess she thinks about how much weight you'd put on after that. So it is this change I do see, because my grandparents, when they eat, they never think about what is going in them. Like our food is really healthy, and I think like if you ask my grandparents, they'd make you eat everything. They're not restrictive at all. Like we're Tamil Brahmins, so we don't eat meat traditionally, or like we're pure vegetarians, no eggs. But they're never restrictive. So a like healthy body in my culture would be somewhat like my body, but not as big as my body. But I've only felt perceived to be big or like to not have a perfect body when I've been in the north. Whenever I go to the south, I feel like no one really comments on you gaining weight. Only if you come back super skinny. Like I remember I was in my skinniest self. Like my grandparents and my aunt and uncle were so concerned. Like they would feed me every day, like extra ghee, extra fats, to make sure I gained some weight, because that they saw that as concerning. It's strange because when I live in Delhi, like I feel more seen, and it's a very North Indian thing for people to comment on, oh, you've put on weight, and say it as if it's a bad thing. And so I think the idea in the north is a skinnier body. And like when I go to Chennai, I feel less seen and less judged. Like, you know, the north is more capitalist and the south is more left-wing, I'd say. I guess the governing structure has something to do with how it works. It is more Western in a certain way, like the major cities at least. And so you are more seen. Like I think when it comes to bodies, it is more judged as well. Whereas in the South, I feel less seen like that. They'd never comment on what you're wearing. They really wouldn't care how you present yourself. And so bodies, I feel, are less seen in that sense. When it comes to conforming to a body standard, I would say for myself, it's more Western, because my mom has a very Western idea of what healthy is in general. And then like living in the north, like I've always been surrounded with people always wanting to be as skinny as possible and considering it healthy. And then even for my dad, like last year, he went on a crash diet thing. And like he loves food, and I feel like he's quite happy. He's never let it affect his mental health. He's quite happy going that way. But like you could see that he'd want to eat more, but he just convinced himself that this is what's good for him. But yeah, like it's mostly a Western influence, because like again, the food they were eating on these diets were all like, it was zucchini and bell peppers and stuff you wouldn't eat in our cuisine, and it would be bland, spiceless, flavorless, with quinoa, and just like it's just food for fuel, not for love, you know. I would say that the Western standards have definitely impacted my relationship with food. and it's something I'm still trying to heal. For the longest time, I didn't like eat more than 2 rotis, and that's enough carbs going on, and after that you can eat anything else but just no more carbs. And I never understood that. Like I just accepted it. And then with chocolate being dessert, I saw my friend eating half a bar of chocolate for tea, and I thought that was such a strange concept that you could just eat it as a snack, because in my head it was just ingrained that it's undoable. So like that idea of restriction has definitely affected my relationship with food. Whereas within my culture, like the idea is not to restrict but to consume fairly. Like don't overdo it, but eat whatever you want. Like eat until you're full, don't starve yourself. And that's something I'm trying to readjust to. I have observed it and I am trying to rectify it. Ever since I've lived alone, I was quite scared about cooking because I've never done it before. It was just me experimenting with new foods and nothing was familiar. So my therapist recommended like cooking home foods, even if it took more time. And I think that really helped. Like I saw how much better I felt after eating something as simple as dal.
My name is Nicole Crestodina and I'm Italian, but I grew up my whole life in London, Camden Town. In terms of food, I feel most connected to Italy. I would have home-cooked meals every night and I wouldn't really consider anything outside of my house like proper dinner. So I always saw the Italian food as the food that gave me the nutrients and energy for my day. I did consider the food I grew up eating to be healthy. I always had a very varied diet at home. We would be forced to eat salad and we would also eat usually freshly made sauces, and there'd always be a lot of vegetables in our fridge. And I'd always see my parents cook the meal, so that always kind of felt healthy because you always kind of saw each ingredient go in one at a time. My parents put a lot of emphasis on eating healthy, but healthy for them was just eating a good amount of food, but also different types of food in one meal. We would have a lot of healthy food, or at least I considered it healthy food, a lot of fruit and veg. And we also, my whole family played a lot of sport, all of the kids. So my dad would usually cook us big meals, and he would always kind of tell us, in a sense, what he was giving us and telling us how that was like the fuel. You know, he would give us big peanut butter and jam sandwiches and tell us, eat all of this will keep you going for the day. Like maybe it's the way I grew up in Italy, but there was always, I feel like they're more sporty. I feel like they do more in their day, they're more active. So maybe that's also like there is more need to have a stronger body. In both Italian and English culture, there is the similar Western, I guess, notion of healthy bodies, which is usually on the slimmer side and like a stronger and more robust like build. But also, of course, in both, I notice a difference between the standards for men and for women. Till I was around 15 years old, I didn't feel much pressure at all to really conform to any type of body type, whether if it was Italian or English. I think I grew up with always big emphasis on just like playing sport, and I always saw food as like a fuel rather than like as a fattener. But then I guess growing older and becoming more aware of how people look at you and maybe listening more, maybe just becoming more conscious of the world around you, I think I definitely have felt just overall more conscious of what my body shape is. Or I definitely also have had moments of just family members making comments like, are you anorexic? I find it very hard to cook for myself. I don't always know what I need. I mean, I feel like what I said earlier, which was I find it like I'm starting to I think in some ways I'm starting to understand better what effects and like the impacts and influences that eating a certain food has on my body and on my behavior that day. But at the same time, I haven't really worked out what is a good balance and what I need. And I often go a while without eating any kind of fresh vegetables, which is strange for when I grew up. That was like every day we'd have that. So I don't know. I feel like like cooking for myself, I'm becoming more aware of what should I eat, what should I give to myself to make me feel maybe energetic, to keep me going the whole day. But also, I don't think I haven't really improved in that. I think I just often end up eating the same thing, and that's quite frustrating. I put pressure on myself to eat healthy, but I feel like it comes quite naturally. Just because I grew up eating quite healthy food, I feel like I wouldn't feel satisfied or feel very good with my dinner being McDonald's. It would taste good at the moment, but I know that afterwards I would feel like not satisfied and just physically not good. I would say I cook different types of pasta and some types of Italian food, but it's more like the approach to the way I cook food, I think, is Italian. Like the way I do usually make the soffritto, or the way I fry things, or the spices I add, herbs. Like rosemary, or I don't know, oregano, or an olive oil and garlic. Those are usually the things I always add. I obviously learned to cook like this from my parents. I saw them cut the onions, cut the garlic every single day growing up. So this also just comes instinctually, and I think there is something that feels good about that. I think there is a taste of home in those foods, but it's important for me to, given that I've branched out into the world and I've left my home, to also leave it in my tummy.
My name is Yasmin and I'm from Turkey. Both of my parents are from Turkey. I grew up in Turkey, but I only lived there until I was 11. And then I moved to London and I spent 4 years there. And then I moved to Saudi Arabia and did the last 3 years of high school there. And now I'm in Amsterdam. I definitely say that the culture I feel most connected to is Turkey. Like, even though I had a little bit of the influence of the other countries that I lived in, I definitely feel most connection to my Turkish side. I was also most exposed to Turkish cuisine growing up. I mean, even after moving abroad, my mom continued making Turkish food at home. I'd say Turkish food is very healthy. I mean, it's very, it has a lot of variety. Like, you can find street food like kebabs and doner that you also see abroad, which isn't on the healthy side as much, I guess, but like homemade food in Turkey is usually very healthy. It's a lot of vegetables and olive oil. It's like a Mediterranean cuisine with a Middle Eastern influence, basically. But yeah, I'd say for the most part, it's very healthy. Almost all of our national foods are considered healthy. When you compare it to, again, I'll use the example of the US, there's a lot of ingredients they use where the ingredient itself is unnatural, whereas even the so-called unhealthy foods like desserts or fried foods that we have still come from natural foods. My mom definitely placed a lot of emphasis on eating healthy, especially when I was younger. She had a strict eating healthy phase, and I think she imposed a lot of that on us as well. Yeah, I'd say people in Turkey overall eat healthy. Like, when I compare it to what I've seen in London, it's very common for them to have like junk food, I think. Like, it's very normal to eat chips or a chocolate bar for a snack, whereas I think in Turkey you would probably eat like fruits for a snack, or like nuts and that kind of stuff. It's just more common and natural for people to eat more whole foods. I think with the culture of being healthy, it depends, because like how people eat in Istanbul, which is the big city, is very different than what you find in majority of like in the rest of Turkey, that's mostly made up of villages where people aren't as health conscious, but they still eat very healthy. It's just like they eat healthy because what's available to them is healthy anyway. You know, they go to the farmer's market and buy vegetables and go to the bakery to buy bread. Whereas in the big cities, there's obviously more unhealthy food options. So people have to be more conscious of their health. But at the same time, I think when you look at like what people call white Turks, which is like the more upscale Western, more European Turkish people, I think there's so much more of a pattern of, you know, being consciously healthy and dieting. And when you look at that type of Turkish people, like the ones that come from like higher socioeconomic classes, they tend to care a lot more about their weight. They all exercise, they all go on diets, and yeah, that's just like very common. In terms of what bodies are considered healthy, I think, again, I want to talk about the divide, especially because I see it in my family as well. Like, when I look at my parents, I dissociate them more with, like, that high-class Turks, whereas when I look at my grandparents, it's completely different because they grew up in different environments. So, for example, when it comes to my grandma, like, she'll see me or my mom and tell us that we're too thin and try to like feed us and make us gain weight. So if you have a little meat on you, you're considered healthier and even more beautiful maybe. Whereas when you look at the other side, like even with my parents, even though they didn't really impose it on me, I think people are a lot more judgmental towards having meat and fat on your body. And what's considered healthy is if you have like abs and you're just skinny and thin. I definitely think it comes from a Western influence. I think also, like, it's quite political. I think those people are the ones that want to make Turkey more Western, whereas the other side wants Turkey to embrace its Mediterraneanness. So, yeah, I think it's definitely the product of, like, Western influence. Not just influence, but also just this, like, desire and yearning to be European. And I think maybe because I grew up with my parents rather than my grandparents, and also with like considering the schools I went to and just the environment that I was in, which was more of an upscale area, I think the way that I view my body and my relationship with my body has a lot of Western influence, and I wouldn't consider what my grandparents consider healthy when I look at my body. And I think there's a lot of Western influence in how I view my body, and I think 99% of that influence has been negative. The relationship that I have with my body definitely impacts the relationship that I have with food. I just see my body as a product of what I feed my body, so they obviously go hand in hand. Yeah, and I think that Western influence on how I view my body and the ideal body that I want to have has also made me struggle with my relationship with food, especially because diet culture is very common in those more upscale areas of Turkey. I've also been influenced by that a lot, and to the point where like food just basically becomes calories and something that I unfortunately have to consume to live, and something that I have to basically sacrifice if I want to conform to those standards that I look up to. And yeah, I mean, it sucks, I guess, because I think in general Turkish people love eating, and food is a huge part of our culture. And I think the relationship with my body, which has affected my relationship with food, has unfortunately made me miss out on a lot of these experiences that I used to enjoy so much before. The way that I eat food and the way that I think about food has changed, and those social gatherings and bonds that I made over food slowly started to decrease because I could no longer focus on the social aspect of it. I was just anxious about the food that I was eating. It's also like this experience that I have where my relationship with food has made it harder for me to socialize with people even. I think you see that a lot in a lot of people in Turkey, where people are no longer going to those Turkish restaurants and looking more at these like healthy Western foods and eating like avocado on toast for breakfast, for example, rather than going out and having Turkish breakfast. I think cooking for myself has made me more comfortable with eating because I have control over what I put in the food and how much I'm eating and when I'm eating as well. I think one of my biggest struggles with food is that it feels like a loss of control. It makes me feel weak. Whereas when I'm cooking on my own and eating on my own, I have complete like autonomy over when I'm gonna eat and what I'm gonna eat. But at the same time, because I'm living alone, it's a lot easier for me to neglect cooking and just snack on like crackers and cheese or just junk food, which I used to never do before when I was living with my family, which sucks because I mean it's good to have freedom with food, but at the same time I noticed that I feel so much better when I'm eating home cooked meals and healthy meals. And those healthy meals that I cook are also usually Turkish, so I think oftentimes even when I'm alone I feel a lot better when I'm cooking the food that I grew up eating that my mom used to cook for me. Most of the food I cook at least has the influence of Turkish cuisine. Like, I don't know, I'll add like a Turkish ingredient. For example, we eat yogurt with a lot of our meals, and I'll always eat yogurt with whatever I'm eating. So even if the food itself isn't Turkish, which I'd say half the time it is, there still is that Turkish influence. I don't know, I really like that. I think it makes me feel more connected to my culture even though I'm away from it, and it feels like home and it feels very comforting when I do cook the types of food that my mom would cook a lot. It just comforts me a lot. It like gives me security, and I can eat it without being anxious about it as much as I do with other foods. And yeah, it just feels like home, I guess.